One of the interesting things about the CBC Broadcasting Centre here in Toronto is the film archives in the basement. There are thousands of hours of priceless old film down there covering thousands of big stories from the past. And that gave writer and director Greig Dymond an idea. Why not use those films to create a new miniseries featuring archived clips from the 1960s and hosted by a fictional conservative broadcaster? The result is a new retro show called Jimmy MacDonald's Canada. Here's a sample.
Good evening, Canadians. I'm Jimmy MacDonald, and I'm going to give it to you straight. There's a plague infecting this great dominion, this beautiful nation of ours, and that plague is called rock and roll.
They were walking down the hall, and I told John, "Thank you for autographing my book." And then I just shook Ringo's arm, and then Paul came by, and I hit a grab him and kissed him, and he was so good about him.
Greig Dymond is here to talk about Jimmy MacDonald's Canada. He joins us in Toronto. Very funny clip there, Greig. Why did you decide to reach into the archives and do this?
Well, this is actually the first series coming out of a new unit at CBC called the Retro Programming Unit. I had worked on the CBC 50th anniversary series about 3 years ago. 2002 was the 50th anniversary, and I think that whetted the appetite of people inside CBC and outside the CBC to see more of this archival material. So I knew that CBC was sitting on this gold mine of great clips that described what we wore, what we ate, what our attitudes were. So I thought we should just embrace the period and come up with the great lost show of the CBC archives.
All right, tell us a little bit about the attitude of Jimmy MacDonald. How'd you come up with him?
Well, Jimmy is a guy who really doesn't want to see the 60s happen at all. I think he was much more comfortable in the 1950s, in that post-war period where we pledged allegiance to the throne a lot more often. The show is set very, very squarely in that Pearson Diefenbaker era, and he's just not comfortable with what's coming down the pipeline ahead of him, what is traditionally known as the 60s, now I guess the Trudeau era, color television. He's very uncomfortable about all these social changes happening in the country.
So do you think at the time that a lot of the things that Jimmy MacDonald, I realize he's fictional, but that he said probably would have been taken seriously by a lot of folks, but now is it just plain funny?
Well, I think in some of these clips we can see that the 8 episodes are divided according to themes. So the clip we saw is from tonight's episode, which is it's called Rock and Roll, Living on Borrowed Time. And some of these attitudes are definitely reflected in the actual clips. The show is a mix of actual archival footage, obviously, and Jimmy MacDonald. The other themes we have are technology, fashion, food, fitness, hockey. Hippies is the second last episode, which gets Jimmy very close to the edge of having a major meltdown on air. And the final episode is about sex, or sexual relations, as he calls it, and that really sends him right over the edge.
How much time did you have to spend burrowing in the basement?
Well, another producer and I, Sabrina Sicoccio, did a lot of the screening and the research. I guess it took about 7 months from start to finish. I had a bit of a previous knowledge of what was in the archives in terms of these anthropological clips on Canada, so I think we knew where to look, but I guess about 6-7 months from start to finish.
And you also have the Prime Minister involved in this as well. What's his role?
Well, considering Jimmy MacDonald didn't actually exist, we have a whole lineup of luminaries who were actually quite happy to testify to the importance of his role in Canadian culture. So Paul Martin, Joe Clark, the Governor General, Don Cherry. Paul Henderson claims that Jimmy MacDonald came to him in a vision mere seconds before he scored the winning goal in 1972. Lloyd Robertson, the historian Charlotte Gray, the late Pierre Burton, claims that Jimmy MacDonald represented everything that was strange about English Canada.
Now, I'm guessing that Jimmy MacDonald had some pretty unpolitically correct views. Was it difficult to make something that could appeal to a modern, more politically correct audience?
Well, because you see him gradually melting down over 8 episodes, you can tell he's not very comfortable in his own skin, and so we're certainly not glorifying these attitudes he held. As the actor Richard Waugh, who I think does a great job in this series, says, Jimmy actually thinks he's quite liberal. There's a section every episode called A Woman's Advice. We have an actress, Teresa Pavlinek, who's also great, a 60s society matriarch who comes on the air and gives advice to parents about what their teenage girls should be up to. And he says, you know, Jimmy thought he was quite liberal giving a woman 1 minute an episode to weigh in. So,
do you think you'll trick Canadians into thinking that Jimmy MacDonald was actually real?
Well, we're definitely not trying to do a War of the Worlds thing. We don't want to have panic in the streets. But we think the mockumentary at the start, setting the whole premise up, is quite broad. But I guess we spent a lot of time trying to make it look absolutely like a CBC current affairs show from the mid-60s, right down to putting little speckles on the video and washing it out and coming up with sets and cigarette ads and things like that. So maybe if they tune in 10 minutes in, they might be mistaken for a real show, but we hope everyone will tune in right at the top of the clock.
Because I can just imagine the calls on our viewer comment line. All right, Greig Dymond, thanks a lot.
Oh, thanks so much, Andrew.
And you can see Jimmy MacDonald's Canada on CBC television every Sunday beginning tonight at 11 p.m. local time, half an hour later in Newfoundland.